it's only our minds keep drawing these lines, and it's only our hearts can erase them when a single new star rearranges a whole constellation. Our watches reset by the sun, but our hearts run on moon time. We wait till some miracle comes, turning night into noontime. But the only true miracles I've ever seen are those sudden and silent occasions when a single new star rearranges a whole constellation. Now I'm not a young man, but still that old midnight keeps calling. I still follow a star, even when all my stars are a-falling. Till the stars fade from view and the whole world seems new in the light of the morning that's breaking, when a single new star rearranges a whole constellation. A single new star rearranges a whole constellation. A single star.
This morning, I just want to start off first by just showing some gratitude for being allowed to speak today. You guys know I'm not the normal speaker. I'm not a professional speaker. I don't do this for a living. So this is me kind of stepping out, out of my comfort zone. And I just want to say thank you. Tony's off this weekend. Him and Julie went down for some well-deserved rest and relaxation and a workshop in San Antonio. And so he asked me to speak today, and I said, okay. He's asked me to speak before, and the first time I said, oh, heck no. Actually, I don't think I said heck, but you know what word goes there. Then the second time he asked me, I said, maybe. I don't think I'm quite ready. And so then this year he asked again, and I said yes. So in preparing for this morning's talk, I did ask myself, what really makes me qualified to give a Sunday lesson at church? And I really couldn't think of a good answer other than Tony asked. And one of the things that I truly believe is that we all have a message to share. We're all here for a purpose, and that message comes through each of us a little bit differently. And so I think there is a uniqueness in each person sharing their message, even if it's a lesson that we've learned before. I think each of us have a special talent to do that. And so one of the things I ask you to think about is if Reverend Tony approached you and asked you to give a service, think about that for a minute. If he asked you to speak next Sunday, how many of you would say yes? I see Carol shaking her head no. I see a couple other nods. Teresa's still in the maybe, not quite ready to step into that out of the comfort zone. So that is interesting. I do want to ask everybody to consider, that's something that we all have, is that message to share. And Tony does occasionally ask, and I think there are some messages to be shared here. And so for those of you that nodded your head, even if it was a little nod, we record, so we have that on video now. And so the next time he asks, I'm going to pull the video up, and I'm going to tell Tony exactly who to go ask. I will tell you that I've made it my personal mission in 2015 to immediately and unequivocally say yes when I'm asked to step outside my comfort zone and to just say yes. and to be willing to step up and take that spiritual growth. It's not something I've always been willing to do, but 2015 is my year. So this has already led to some amazing opportunities and some truths that have already happened in my life. And it's also allowed just for some, growth opportunities. But it also, it sometimes leads to self-doubt. So as soon as you say yes, there's that moment afterwards where you stop and say, what in the heck have I done? Why did I say yes? And there's times when you even think about trying to reverse it and get out, which I'll tell you, I've gone through that in the last couple of weeks, saying, I can't believe I agreed to that. But it does remind me in those times of one of the famous quotes from Marianne Williamson, and I think you guys have probably familiar with this quote, but it's, our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. And it is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. And that's a quote from her book, Return to Love. And if you haven't read that book, it's an amazing book that really asks each of us to step out there and take that step into faith. So about 6 or 7 weeks ago, I was sitting here on a Sunday morning, and it was during the service, and I was having a particularly hard morning. I couldn't stay focused. I knew the lesson. It was one of the very first lessons in Tony's 7-part series of Ask Yourself This. And I knew it was a lesson I needed to be hearing, but I just sat there and felt like it wasn't getting in. I felt like I couldn't stay focused. My mind was kind of thinking some other thoughts, some untrue thoughts. And I remember thinking to myself as that was happening that I really just needed a way to get out of myself, get out of my own head, because I knew I wanted to be listening and paying attention, and I just found myself in a different place. And so that's actually when the thought for this talk first came to me, that I'm a computer geek by day. That's what I do at my day job. And so the thought came to me that as I was sitting there, it was like I'd really just love to have a Control-Alt-Delete for my mind, where I could just push those buttons just like you do with a computer and kind of reset the thinking that was going on. And so I remember thinking when I had that thought, wow, that would make a really good Sunday service. And then that's where I'll tell you, be careful what you think, because sometimes that will happen. So I started thinking about that concept about with computers and Control-Alt-Delete, and I really started looking at some of the analogies that really can happen between a Control-Alt-Delete reset and what the thinking is going on in our mind. And so I did a little research into the history of computers and the history of the Control-Alt-Delete, kind of where that came from. And it turns out that early on in the creation of computers back in the 80s, there were a lot of annoying behaviors and habits that computers had that the programmers had to deal with. And I'm sure many of you have experienced these, but they get stuck in a loop. They start responding inconsistently or sporadically. Even when you give them a normal command, they go off and do something else. Sometimes two programs will be running at the same time and they conflict. And so that will also cause it to not do what you're expecting it to do. Sometimes they will stop responding to input. So no matter what you do with your keyboard or your mouse, they won't do anything. And sometimes they just completely freeze up and they're unresponsive. And so the Control-Alt-Delete command was actually created by a guy from IBM back in the 1980s named David Bradley. And it was to deal with all these issues with the computer. So it's a combination of the keyboard keys that will actually terminate a task that's running, or it'll restart the operating system. And in some systems, it'll bring up a window and it'll let you look at everything that's running, and it'll let you pick the ones that you no longer want to run. Wouldn't that be nice, right? If we could just pick up our thoughts and look at the list and go, ooh, that one's no good, that one's no good. And so when the operating seems stuck and it's waiting for an if something's running and it gets stuck, it also, the Control-Alt-Delete provides an interrupt. So when the computer's like looping and running, it's in its own world really, and it's not paying attention. The Control-Alt-Delete, it'll do a little interrupt or a break key so that you can input new instructions. So as I started thinking about all those things that happens, and it seemed like to me that they all have analogies in what we experience in our spiritual world, in our spiritual mind, and in our spiritual heart. Have you ever had times when you had conflicting ideas and thoughts that were incompatible that started to cause chaos and indecision in your life, or perhaps inconsistent results? And sometimes are we overloaded with untrue thoughts or self-doubts, and that can lead us to a place where we stop accepting input. We let those run and we don't allow new ideas to come in. Or times, and I've experienced this personally, where you are completely frozen and unresponsive. And I'll tell you a story about that later. It's something that's happened in my past. So I'd propose to you that there are, just like a computer, there are ways that we can do a Control-Alt-Delete on ourselves. We don't technically have those buttons, right? Can't push those and do the reset, but there are things that we can do. And one of the first things that came to my mind was taking a really deep breath. And to me, that's like the interrupt key. It actually stops your thinking for a minute, and actually sometimes it takes a couple of deep breaths. But you know, your body's designed to release 70% of the toxins that we have through breathing. And so breathing is a great way to just interrupt your thought and let your brain, you know, soak in that new oxygen and lower your anxiety level. And the breathing can actually, you know, relax the mind and bring clarity. So you need that interrupt key just to stop and take a deep breath. And we've all heard that in all of our spiritual teachings. The next one that I thought of was meditation. And in my mind, meditation is like the restarting the operating system, where you just clear all your thoughts, clear the space, and let all those confusing commands and mental patterns and loops and thoughts, just set them to the side, and it lets you start fresh in that space all again to accept new. And then the next one that I came up was reconnecting with spirit. This is probably the most important one. And when we feel disconnected from spirit, we get into a lot of behavior patterns that are not necessarily good for us. Fearful, judgmental, controlling. And I find that when we're in that space, feeling disconnected, you can misinterpret a lot of things that are going around you. I had a situation in my own life last week where I was feeling particularly disconnected. And I don't think I really realized it at the time, and it kind of stayed in that space throughout the day. It wasn't a particularly good day. And throughout the day, I found that I moved more into a space of kind of some sadness and feeling alone. And towards the end of the day, I found that I misinterpreted something a friend had said and kind of got into an argument. And when I look back on it now, if I'd have realized at the beginning of the day that feeling of disconnectedness, of not feeling spirit in my life, then I think I could have done the reset at that point and not gone through the end of the day and gotten to that place where I'd had the argument with the friend. And so I do think that that whole situation could have avoided if I had taken a moment to take a deep breath and kind of reset my thinking. And there's so many ways to reconnect with spirit. Meditation's one that we've talked about. Some people do it through reconnecting with nature. You know, a lot of people like to get out in the trees and in the wind. That's a good way to reconnect. Some people do it through music. I always see Lizzie playing, and you can definitely see that she's definitely connecting through spirit, through music. Volunteering is another way that people can connect with spirit. I know for myself, volunteer work, you know, it doesn't matter what you're doing, working at the food bank, walking a dog at the dog shelter, helping someone shop for groceries. If you're in a space and you're just not feeling good about anything in your life, volunteering is a way to just get out of that space and to reset and to really, you can't feel bad after you go and volunteer. It's just impossible. So I know many of you have probably already found your own ways to do your reconnect, your spiritual reset, if you will. The key is being aware in those moments. So we all know to breathe and to meditate and to reconnect with spirit. But the real key is to just be aware of the times when we need that in our lives. And as Tony says, the key to enlightenment is just being aware that much sooner in each situation of those. And I think it's important to remember and recognize that there are times when we need that reset. And the most important thing is to try to interrupt the control by taking the deep breath, alter our thinking, and then delete those thoughts that really no longer serve us. And I mentioned earlier, I had a time in my life where I had a complete spiritual reset. And so I want to tell y'all this story. It happened about 25 years ago when I was in high school. I was asked to do the prayer at high school graduation commencement ceremonies. And so I went to a fairly large high school out in East Texas, and our high school graduation ceremony was held at this big concert hall. It's called the Oil Palace. It's Tyler, it's East Texas, everything has to do with oil. So it was this huge concert hall, and I think my graduating class was about 650 people. And they were so worried that there were going to be too many people that there wouldn't be enough room in this concert hall. So they gave out tickets, and they only allowed each family to bring 10 people to the graduation ceremonies. And so I was excited about, saying this prayer and nervous. And so I worked on it for weeks and weeks and weeks and had it all written out and memorized. And I made my mom sit and listen to me practice it over and over and over to make sure I had all the pauses in the right place and could say all the words right. So I was very prepared, very prepared. And so it came time of the ceremony, and I was sitting up on stage, and it got to be the point it was about my time to speak, and I started thinking about those 10 tickets per person, and I started doing the math, and I was like, 650 people and 10 tickets. There's over 6,500 people in this concert hall. And so that probably wasn't the best thought to have right before, I walked up to the stage. And so I remember getting up, when it was my time, and I leaned into the microphone and asked everybody to close their eyes. And I started, the prayer, and I said, "Dear Heavenly Father." And what never occurred to me is I'd never spoken on a microphone before and never practiced that part of what was about to happen. And so what came out were these 3 very crackly, soft-spoken words that just sounded ridiculous. And they came out of this huge speaker sound system, and it traveled all the way to the back of the auditorium and bounced off the back wall. Those things are built for reverberation. And they bounced off the back wall, and they came back, and they hit my ears, and all I could think of was that, oh my gosh, that sounded terrible. And I literally froze. I could not remember the next, and I didn't write out, any, I have my notes right here today because that thing is still in my mind, but I didn't write out anything to take with me because I had practiced it so much. I was just positive. I knew it 100%. And so I didn't have any notes with me. And so I just literally, I froze. And I probably stood there for 20 or 30 seconds. And when you're in front of people, that's like a lifetime of silence. And I remember thinking that, people in the audience must be thinking, was this supposed to be a silent prayer? What's going on here? And I really didn't know what to do. I was very panicked, and I probably didn't help, but I opened one eye and I looked out, and I could just see these row of, students sitting there, and they all had this look on their face like, what has happened here? Her cheese has completely slid off her cracker. She does not know what's going on. And I just closed my eye again because I couldn't figure out what to do. But what I'll tell you happened next was what I call it a divinely ordered spiritual reset. I don't have any recollection of what happened from that point forward. What I know and what I'm going to tell you is what my mom told me, that after those 20 seconds, I started again with Dear Heavenly Father, came out in a big, bold, beautiful voice, and then I finished with a prayer. She said it was one of the most beautiful prayers she'd ever heard. It wasn't any of the words I had practiced for the 2 to 3 weeks before, and everything worked out fine. And I didn't remember it at the time. I still don't remember it to this day, but that's what she tells me what happened. And in that moment, I will tell you, for me, that was just a complete spiritual reset. Somebody else took over the operating system, spirit, not someone else, we know who it was. Spirit took over the operating system and finished that prayer for me. And I can tell you, I couldn't have been more thankful for that spiritual reset moment in my life. I will tell you that I hope that you never have to experience something that panic to have a spiritual reset. Hopefully, the items that we've talked about today are something that we can all try to be aware of and take deep breaths and interrupt our thinking and replace that thinking when we need to. And now I would like to leave you all with a challenge for you all to step out of your comfort zone. And no matter how scary or challenging it is to share your message, I just ask that each of you be willing to take that chance and to say yes if you're asked. So, thank you.
I do attempt something a little bit different today. And then instead of doing the Control Alt Delete, we're going to see if we can step outside of the whole operating system. Been watching a lot of Muji lately, and it's just really powerful stuff. I've had some experiences with that, and I wanted to share some of the stuff, kind of combining two of these practices together to really get in touch with and be in the presence, which is our real self, capital R, capital S. And so if you will, just really allow yourself, give yourself the gift of being able to really just drop mind, drop thoughts, and just for the next few minutes, let's share this space together. The presence, which is that ground of your being. It's not an identity, it's not a woman, it's not a man, has no preferences or any of those things. It's just awareness, and there's no distance to get to this space. So if you will, I want you to bring to mind and have the thought of a blue sky with big, white, fluffy clouds. Image, blue sky, white, fluffy clouds. And now ask yourself, who is having this thought of blue sky, white, fluffy clouds? Who is imaging this sky with clouds? And in the space created by that question, who is having this thought? Drop in behind that thought. Drop into that space that the thought, that the question made. And in that space is a presence and awareness that is perceiving the thought of who. There is no going to, coming from this space. It just simply is. It is simply here. It needs nothing. It carries nothing. It let go of nothing. There's nothing to change, nothing to fix, nothing to heal. It just simply is. It is the awareness, the perceiver of the thought and of the thinker. You're not imagining this presence, and you're not creating. You're simply observing. You're here, but you're not waiting. There's nothing to expect. There's no effort to make. And now every time I say, I am, or use reference to any I want you to mentally repeat it to yourself. I am. I, consciousness, am. I am. I, existence, am. This itself is your own blessedness. You're at one with your own natural being, natural joy, natural space, stillness. Nothing more is needed. This presence, your truth, is forever whole, forever complete, forever calm. Now you will notice that when you open your eyes, that inwardly it will have made no difference to the presence of your being. Nothing will have changed. You will open your eyes and look around you and see everyone, and yet this presence will still be there. And as you open your eyes, you will know that you are wholly here.